Hi, this presentation is going to define the goals of the schema.org Blueprints module for Drupal. So I want to start off with an introduction. Who am I and what problem am I trying to solve? My name is Jake Brockwitz. I want to make your life easier by solving complex problems with simple, well thought out solutions. You can find me at jrockwitz on the web, and I hope you take that away from this presentation, that I'm trying to solve a really complex, challenging problem in the community with a really well thought out and as simple of a solution as possible. And the challenge that we're facing in our community is we need to create, personalize, and distribute content that is consumable by multiple channels. And the approach, or what we're exploring here, is implementing a next-generation content management system that supports progressive decoupling, structured data, advanced content authoring, and omnichannel publishing. Omnichannel publishing is another way to say that we want to target more than just web pages. We want voice, mobile, search engines, third parties, everything. We want our data to just be readable by any system. AI, just throw that out there. So there are some concepts that I'm kind of introducing, and I want to kind of step back and walk through them and talk about headless for 1 second. This is straight from Wikipedia. A headless content management system is a backend only content management system that acts primarily as a content repository. And when I do all my research on headless, it's always talked about a content repository, and people rarely mention this key thing. It's also a content authoring tool. The back end is where you create the content, and then you move on. A headless CMS makes content accessible via an API for display on any device without a built-in front end or presentation layer. So once the content's authored, and frankly the key are well structured and consumable by these systems, you can build front ends. Any type of front end. It can move at a different pace in your back end. It could be in a different system. People are using Node.js for front ends and Drupal, which is PHP, for back ends. And the key is content authoring. And I've been exploring this concept of using schema.org. And so schema.org is a collaborative community activity with a mission to create, maintain, and promote schemas for structured data on the internet, on web pages, and email messages, and beyond. It's collaboration of Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, and Yandex to give a specification that's open to defining things. So search engines can consume it and use it. When you see enhanced search results in Google, it's almost always driven by schema.org. If you put recipe schema on your site, when someone searches for recipes, they'll get actually a very pretty carousel of recipes that they could choose from. Email messages, I like that one because I was always thrown off about it until I read up more. So schema has a specification for actions. And when you get an email, if they put this schema in the email to say, here's the action to unsubscribe, here's the action to learn more, here's the action to manage your preferences, here's the event information about this email. Gmail, which does it all the time, will pick up this information, add little extra UI widgets to enhance the user experience. So this has been around for 10 years. And let's just quickly go to the site. And this is schema.org. And it just helps to say, this is a very simple site because the goal is just to have a specification. So here, if we go to schemas, we can list full types. Here, I'm going to go to event. It also offers a little extra specificity of subtypes. There are, I think, almost 900 types and about 1,500 properties. We get to an event. It describes what an event is. And keep in mind, they're trying to keep it generic and broad. Event could be an event people attend, an event online. So then there's a lot of properties to kind of address that. There are start and end dates. There's door times. If you have a very rich event, you could define a full schedule for the event. So if it was like a festival, you might say, well, here's the schedule for that festival. And you can see there's a ton of data with descriptions, explanations. Even at the bottom, there's examples of how to use this data. And keep this in mind. This is the JSON LD. This is what search engines look for and what they use. Well, let's keep going. So I've moved on to say I want to think about a schema.org first approach, which leverages schema.org as the foundation for building content models using structured data, which is API first, standardized, and universal. And the schema.org Blueprints model takes a schema.org first approach to building content models and structured data in Drupal. And this demo is to really say we need to get schema.org into Drupal. We need to bring these together so then we could start building content models. So to kind of introduce you to the demo, I'm just logging in to this demo, and the first thing I'm going to do is just show you the report. So there's a schema.org blueprints report, and it brings everything you saw on the schema.org website into Drupal. It imports that data, which is in a CSV format, and it gives us the ability to understand it in Drupal. So I can browse to types. This is every type. There's 1,300. If I filter down by things, I can do a similar thing of browsing to an event. And one key thing here is it's about, in Drupal, we understand schema. And in Drupal, we can enhance just this information. Two key enhancements here are I'm tracking references. So these are articles on the web to help us better understand what we could do with the schema.org event markup, how Google uses it, what are some examples of it, what are some gotchas. And then you see most of this is right from schema.org. You can even click here and go back to schema.org. And at the bottom, I do list out some custom data. What are the default when I go to create an event in Drupal, what are the default properties that I've specified in configuration? I want to emphasize what you're seeing is completely customizable. And then there's all the properties. I also have ignored some properties, which is configurable. The idea here is about 20% of the properties in Schema are so specific that no one would use them in most real-world scenarios, so let's ignore them. It simplifies the UI and makes it a little easier to navigate through. You can even customize that to get very specific so that your users are only looking at properties that have been vetted by your content architects. And finally, this is just about relationships. What are all the relationships that are possible? Because you see, they say this is, we go over here, we have a property, and then we have the data types. The range includes, these are the data types. What are the possible values, and whether an attendee can be an organization or a person. I'm going to keep going and take a step back, and let's talk about goals. What are the goals for the schema.org blueprints module? And I've decided to break them up into primary, secondary, and tertiary. And the primary ones I figured out early on when I started building this out. Number one is structured data. That is what schema.org is, and we want to have clearly well thought out structured data in Drupal, and that is schema.org. APIs, we want to be able to expose that clean structured data to APIs for our headless CMS or decoupled or third parties. And lastly, because it's schema.org and it's driven by search engines, we should have great SEO. Secondary things, because think about it this way, this module is meant to be a foundation for the next generation of a Drupal website. So it switches over to what's the administrative interface, what are the content authoring enhancements that the schema.org blueprints module can do? When it's generating a content type, can it nudge that field when someone goes to edit that widget to have a content browser? How can it integrate in the vast community, contrib modules? And I did add the 6.1 multilingual support. I've just learned from experience that from day one, you want to have an understanding of multilingual capabilities when you're building out a new website. And the tertiary, listen, this is open source. And more importantly, I want to take the lesson from open source about building modular and extendable code that leads to stable and reliable code. And this is the elevator pitch that has become the main text on the schema.org blueprints module page. The schema.org blueprints module provides perfect data structures, pristine APIs, and great SEO. So it's schema.org, the APIs are JSON LD. And the great SEO is this spec called JSON LD, which is JSON linked data. It's a way of describing data using JSON. Now, we've gone over this, but I just want to point out I'm going to do a demo and talk through the data structures. And we saw reporting. The reporting leads to taking that information and creating mappings. And then you can enhance those mappings using mapping sets. And frankly, mapping types I don't go into, but mapping types are the definition of, I would like to take nodes and map them to schema.org. I would like to take paragraphs or media, and it's just kind of little extra configuration. I'll try to talk through mapping types while I go through the demo. With JSON API, we just want to show the pristine APIs, the naming conventions. I'm not going to show the open API documentation, but I want to emphasize that it's there. Completely clean documentation pulling descriptions from schema.org. And the JSON LD is as easy as showing you the JSON LD that's being generated. So this is the deep dive in the demo. And to start, this is a clean vanilla instance of Drupal. I will go into the admin authoring stuff, but we're in the Gin admin theme. And the first thing we need to do is take over some of Drupal's default media types or content types, entity types. And in this case, before we create anything, we want to take the image, like the media image with a field media image is on there. We want to go to the schema.org tab and say, I would like to, and this is done in that mapping type says, for media, I would like to take the image and map it to the image object in schema.org. And what this does is it builds that relationship. And this is all green because it's taking existing fields in Drupal and mapping them to schema.org properties. But I want to pause here and emphasize how much thought has gone into schema.org around naming conventions. There's 3 discrepancies here. In Drupal, we call authored on the created. That's what the machine name is in the system. In Schema, they realize that probably created's like an action. You have to be specific. You have to say the date created, similar to date modified. And more importantly, look at in language. In Drupal, we say language. Here's a language field. That stores the language of the content. But think about it. Language is really an object. That is not a property. That is an object. English is a language. Spanish is a language. And you could see there's a reference here to language. I actually can show you a little. You can click in here and look at it in language. This is a type in Schema, and it's a specification. And you can add some additional information, descriptions, identifiers, just extra data about that language, maybe the history of it. But coming back to here, they realize, well, this is really about what language this content is in, or this media, this image is in. So hence they came up with the simple in language. I'm not going to spend too much more time on property. There's 3 more that I want to kind of dwell on, but I'm going to keep going. So now we have image. So we've defined a lower level component. We can go in and say, I would like to go after higher level components. So I'm in the content types. We're going to come back to article and basic page. But for now, I could go into add schema type. And this is kind of like a little starting point where you could pick the types you want to start. And these are all customizable hints. And generally, I'm trying to figure out how to start from general to specific. So before you create an organization, person, or event, you need to have a place where they can live, where they come from. So place is usually one of the first types you need to create. And you can see what's happening here is we're getting a little yellow here to show us new fields are going to be added to Drupal. Address is mapping to the address field because I have the address module installed. Hence the example we're getting into content authoring. I'm making decisions here. Image maps to image, telephone number. If we wanted more properties, we could hit show unmapped and browse all the properties here and pick and choose which ones we want. The example is I use telephone number, and maybe when I'm looking at this, I'm like, well, my organization, this place has a fax number. I can go in, hit add new. I can also use existing fields. And what's happening here is we get a little field creation form where we could actually change the type, but there's all this configuration that's customizable set up to figure this out, to say fax numbers map to the telephone field if the telephone module is enabled, which I strongly recommend. And it does all the naming conventions, and the descriptions are actually dynamically pulled from Schema. We don't need unlimited. I'm going to hit save. Now, in this demo, we could keep going and create all these different types one by one and walking through it. What I want to do is do all of them at once because there's a pattern here. We want a set of types. Before I go there, I want to spend one second to say, I'm also going to generate schema.org mappings for article and basic page, but I want to look at basic page for 1 second and go over here and show you what will happen in the backend. I have said that basic pages should support subtyping. Subtyping is a pattern of adding a little extra specificity to a type so that if I scroll down here, we get this list. So if I have a web page on the site, I can tell Google this is actually an about page. And frankly, that'll go right up in your search result and be listed as the about content of your site. If I'm a medical website, I could say this is a medical web page. If I'm putting question and answers on the page, I could say it's a QA page. Keep in mind, you can also create dedicated instances. That usually happens with collection pages and media pages because you're going to need extra fields. You're going to need to create a media gallery, and you're going to need to create a relationship to a bunch of media objects. Anyway, let's close the mapping. Keep going. So this is just on by default. You see that I'm mapping 5 existing fields, and then there's 3 that are getting added to web pages. And these 3 fields reinforce, frankly, in my mind, how awesome schema.org is. First off, they've realized on a web page, you need to be very specific. You need to say primary image of the page because everyone's looking for that on web pages. So by having this level of specificity, it tells, well, in Twitter, this is the primary image of the page. In Facebook, in a search result, on your site, in your thumbnails, it's very clear what the key asset is on the page to target. And that'll point to a media object, which is great. Then with links, they were like, we can't just have related links. We need to have related and significant. And I've thought a little bit about this, and it makes a lot of sense if you think about it as you have an article. I work in healthcare. It's about some research, and it's about a disease and a researcher. And it's two significant links to an article like that. You'd want to link to the researcher, the person who's doing the research, and the type of disease that they're talking about. Those are significant links. Meanwhile, you might want to link to other blog posts that are related to this blog post and have a feed that keeps getting updated. This leads to, I hinted at personalization. This leads exactly to personalization. If you were personalizing links on your site, I would never touch significant links. That would be, these are links that an editor said are important. Related links might not even be set. They might be dynamically fed off your personalization engine because it knows relationships and tags. It could be tag driven. For now, we can just let people enter them. I'm going to hit save. So this is, keep in mind, I am slowly taking over the site. I've taken over 3 or 4 entities, but now let's just take over the site fully. So I'm going to go over to configuration, and this is a demo where I'm not spending a lot of time on configuration, but we can go in and look at the mappings. We've created these 3 mappings. It helps us understand exactly what's happening. We can even go into show details and see precisely what's going on. We could download this data. But what's more important is I want to go over to this mapping sets. And by the way, just stop by mapping types for a second. That's just how, when I went to that page and the page in Drupal got mapped to web page, that's a part of the mapping type for content types or nodes. And these are all the recommended types in all the configuration settings. For every single thing you're seeing me do, there's a configuration setting. So if you don't like it, you can enhance it. Mapping sets. These are sets of related schema.org types mapped to Drupal entity types and figuring out which ones need to be mixed with which. A concrete example would be if I need to create how-to, which is like little pieces of information to put together a whole sequence of steps. We need a whole bunch of paragraphs that are nested and interrelated. So it's set up all those paragraphs and then build the node content type how-to. For this demo, I'm going to hit up setup types. It's going to, if I got to click here and keep talking. So it's spinning. It's spinning right now. It's building out an entire information architecture from scratch, generating all the configuration, all the form display modes, the widgets, the decisions, the entity references. So it's basically built out the site's architecture. There's a basic website. Now that we've done this, the operations change. And I also, when we read these operations, I want to emphasize that this is a developer-centric aspect of this module. The pattern in Drupal, when you're doing tests, is you set up a test. So we're setting up types, and you could tear down types. And then for Devel, which is what I'm using to generate content, you can generate content or you could kill content. I think in Devel they picked kill because you needed to emphasize that you're really deleting things, and kill is a harsh way of saying delete. But for now, I just want to generate content because, by the way, I'm doing all this stuff here and you're not seeing the results. You're just seeing I'm creating these things and you're not seeing how we can use these things. So I've created some dummy content on the site, created some media items. I've actually learned from experience. I want to just go to Devel for 1 second. If I do generate, when I start demoing things, I get hit pretty hard where I just want to throw up some more media types. So if we start playing with media, it's there. But now let's go to the site. We've got content. We've got a person. We've got an event. Person is good to spend a second on. It actually, if you have the field group module, you can configure it. It's already out of the box to set up field groups with reasonable naming conventions to group the fields together. Brings the media and assets together, configures them. Now, this is an interesting nuance that I've decided to do. In Scheme, I'm using first name, middle name, and last name. That's more common in the US and England. But frankly, Schema's got it right because underneath the hood, those are mapped to given name, additional name, and family name. And this is stuff you can configure and decide if you don't want to change it to first name, middle name, and last name. And frankly, I left honorific, prefix, and suffix because I felt like those were enough. But sometimes in the US, we use surname. Now you get all this data here, and we get some links, same as, but let's say we have structured data. This is clearly well-defined data broken up into individual pieces and components. We can go to our JSON API and preview it here and see that we get a person. We get some internal properties, but then we start looking at the other properties and fields. See, additional name, family name, and given name is coming right through perfectly. And what's great about this is external users. So yes, usually APIs are from one machine to another, but when a developer has to look at this, they know exactly what's happening here. They can literally go to schema.org, look up what family name is, understand the data. And the open API spec pulls those descriptions in. So your APIs are clear, concise, and standard. Now, let's move forward, go here. So we said structured data, APIs, and now SEO. And at the bottom is this JSON LD packet. And I want to emphasize what I'm showing you here is embedded in the head of this page. If we were doing progressively decoupled and this was a web page we were serving, we would have great SEO on this page. We can get into headless for 1 second. As I scroll down, there's a schema.org blueprints JSON LD breadcrumb where it pulls the breadcrumb into the JSON LD packet. If you don't want this, you turn off the module. That goes to the later thing of everything's modularly broken down. Now we get our perfect data. This is what search engines are looking for. I actually have code in here to sort these in a little friendly type, even though Google could care less about the order of your properties because they're just reading it and putting it into their machine learning. But for us, it's nice to be able to read it and understand exactly what's happening here. And for headless decoupled, there's a dedicated schema.org, it's a lot to schema.org blueprints JSON LD endpoint module. And that provides an endpoint. So that provides a place you could call and take this and embed this into your headless front end. Any front end, we could gradually figure out how to enhance the URIs. So we've gone through the key primary goals of, I want to just reiterate, structured data, APIs, and SEO. Now, I want to move into content authoring, and I think a good way to do that from here to kind of touch the surface of this is we start off very basic, and we've used schema.org to create the initial content types. Now, contact information, telephone, and email is probably enough for a person. But if we go up here and we want to talk about organizations, let's look at organization. Well, we have a primary phone number and email, but what if we wanted more? What if we wanted contact points? And that's a concept in schema, and I'm going to go over to paragraphs because think about it, we want to create a sub-component, so paragraphs works great for this. I go to add type, and I say I want a contact point. It's a contact point, example, customer complaint department. Let's use that. Let's say complaint department. Okay. Goes in and creates the type, and we have 3 properties. The contact type, which right now it's a plain text field. You could change this to a drop-down. That's what's very powerful here. You could go in and say, I'd like to make this a list. For now, it's fine. Email, telephone. I'm going to hit save. So if we created an understanding of contact points, even generated the endpoints for it. Now over here, when we go to edit, go down here. I'm probably going to run into little issues here. Let's see what happens. We go down, telephone number. Oh, I forgot one step. Always happens. Demos are always like that. Here's what I forgot to do. I forgot to navigate to organization, manage fields, schema. Now we're going to see a little extra tool here. So I said you could show unmapped. We could scroll to contact point. Or let's say you were not mapped and you were just curious and you wanted to find it. You can also do a filter. And I go in here and I can say add new field. It's automatically figuring out it's paragraphs unlimited. That's configuration settings. It actually figures out it's a paragraph, but knows that we want unlimited. If you had other entity types that were mapped to contact point, that would happen. Now we fixed it. If I hit refresh, we go down here and we get the ability to add a contact point. So I think I have billing complaint department. I'm going to make a number up. Okay. Let's say I'm going to do 1 and we're going to do a support. And this is a universal thing. So 888 999, 999. We can now say, well, this is paragraphs. One of the reasons paragraphs is very popular, it's used. We can promote this to a paragraph. And this is where you have a dedicated schema.org paragraphs module that does these enhancements. If you have paragraphs library turned on, it automatically, you can say, I want contact points to be reusable. And this moves it out of this node. I don't know if people are familiar with this. It makes it possible for you to edit it right here, but it's global. Anyone will get this update. And let's say I hit save. Oh, this postal code error is a real bummer. We'll have to fix that. It should work. See, because it's not, man, address is so well thought out that we're going to have to just say, yeah, postal code's not going to work for us. Hit save. And now we have our nice little contact points grouped together. And if we go to our JSON LD, we're going to see our contact point data linking to objects, having more information. Now, really, to get us into the back end, we can go over to paragraphs and see how paragraphs library work. It tracks the usage. We know exactly where it is. Now we're on to the secondary goal. And you could see how, as I was building out these content modeling tools, I wound up realizing I had to think about content authoring. And from day one, I was using the Gin admin theme because it is a radically new administrative interface for Drupal. It's beautiful. I'm using the login page, which is beautiful. Hopefully you saw that. The admin toolbar. I'm experimenting with customizable dashboards and just adding the environment indicator, just trying to set things up. Keep in mind, these are minor little tweaks in a demo module, very little configuration, but then I really focus on content authoring patterns. You can see that I'm using media from the get-go. We're doing a lot of work with embedded content, adding content browsing, inline entity editing, tracking entity usage, content cloning, basically getting these best practices working to make sure they fit into it. Also, just to make a demo just seem like a real instance of Drupal, because we're trying to set a foundation for building great houses. We kind of have to show a starter house, a demo of a house. And the multilingual I won't spend a lot of time on, but I want to emphasize what that means is if you turn on the schema.org translations module, when you start creating your types and you have languages turned on, it will figure out what fields, because it's structured data, what fields should be translated and what fields should not be translated. Drupal does not have an opinion on that. It just says everything's translated. And the best example would be a recipe. Obviously, you want the recipe title, description, ingredients translated. But the serving, the number of servings, it's a number. You don't want to translate that. And that's what it starts to figure out, because we have structure. Think about this. You have structured data from the get-go, so you can automate a lot of things. Because it's not, in the code, we know what a serving size is. It's mapped. Even if you change the field name, we mapped it to schema.org, which has a spec that a serving size is a number, a numeric integer. So we're going to do a deep dive into content authoring, and I'm going to keep this quick because a lot of this should be familiar to people in the community, but I want to, listen, when you're building great site, like when you're building a site, you want to think about these things. So let's take an article. And we're on an article. We're going to hit edit. And the first thing, and by the way, this was generated, so we're going to have to say, let's not use plain text in basic. All I'm doing is bringing in best practices. And when I bring in these best practices, what it allows me to do is experiment with improving them. So I can embed media here. This is just showing drag and drop file uploads. I'm going to put that in, insert media. If we edit it, we could right align it. Can add a caption to it. Maybe I don't add a caption. At the bottom, we can also do the same embed pattern. And this stuff, this is not schema per se. It's just I'm testing these patterns. I'm making it so we have a content browser very clean. I want to select this. The screen's a little small, so we select this entity. I want to embed the full content, embed it at the bottom. It's here. If we view source, we're going to see we get our little embed codes. There's a dedicated schema.org embed module, blueprints embed module, which sees this data and pulls this data out and puts it in your JSON LD. So even your rich WYSIWYG editor experience is not blobs of data. It actually is rich data. This is, I want to emphasize to people when they question that, this is rich data. It has a UUID which references the object where the information is coming from. To reinforce that, I want to show you link management. If I go in and we want to link this, we can pick a link. I'm using the link it module, which gives us a nice autocomplete with a customizable teaser, I hit save, and when I do the source, we get a full reference to the link, full control over the link. It helps so much. We know exactly what's going on. We can switch the text when we translate it. Can't emphasize that part of the link hit module. So moving on, and we've just stayed on the WYSIWYG, and I'm just showing WYSIWYG, basically enhancements to kind of build better relationships that are beneficial to the schema.org blueprints module. Down below, we can also see how we can do a single author. We can link to it. We can edit, inline editing. We can go down here. We can do, well, this is just a simple image because the article, by the way, the article out of the box doesn't use media. We have to fix that in the community. But for now, it's an image, which is good enough. Oh boy, I want to think of the other ones. Entity clone is set up. Boy, keep in mind, I'm trying to cover a lot of things. It's just trying to get these best practices, see them working, to make sure that the foundation, what you're building on top of it's going to work as expected. If I go back, I want to just make sure. I think I covered everything. Yep. Okay. So the third goal is I don't have anything to demo. I just want to say this is a completely, open source module. And the goal of the demo is to leverage the best in class of open source tools in our community. So this is inspired by popular distributions. And with this module, it's built to be modular and extendable. There are a lot of sub-modules so that you can turn on and off these features. And each feature has configurable settings and APIs, like hooks that you can tweak things. So that's your SonLD, you can tweak to your heart's delight. Ultimately, the goal is to produce stable, reliable, and testable code. So by having these smaller modules, you can test that functionality. It's easier for you to contribute. If there's a minor bug with the JSON LD endpoint, someone go right in, or an integration. And I want to wrap up and just reinforce the benefits of everything I just showed you. So the benefits of the schema.org blueprints module is standardization, simplification, acceleration. Look, the data is easy to understand. Leveraging schema.org makes it easier for organizations to create a content information architecture that's simple for API consumers and search engines to understand. Developers also understand it. Kind of leads to simplification, simpler to build, fewer resources. Developers understand things. They don't have to do a lot of guesswork when they come on your team. They know exactly how the content's structured. Having a standardized content information architecture removes the challenge of naming things. Developers spend days, even doing relationships and managing them. They're all managed by this module. It creates those entity references for you. So you need fewer resources to build rich content. And this all leads to just acceleration. It's faster to implement. It allows your organization's content and information architecture to be built in a few clicks. I want to just emphasize, in one click, I built out the preliminary IA for a basic Drupal website. And we didn't even go down to the other mapping sets. At the bottom of there is like all the mapping sets to build out a restaurant website or an entertainment website where you have TV shows, movies, and podcasts. Or, I mean, it's endless because that's the point of schema.org. It's anything you want. And by having these tools, you can quickly spin up an architecture, debug it, tear it down, spin it up again, and be done. And one of the goals, I don't spend a lot of time, is to get you 80% there. So you have a preliminary base architecture that meets your organization needs, and the remaining 20% is the custom stuff that schema.org can't really get to, or it just needs a little extra thought. And really, the number one goal of the schema.org blueprints module is to empower organizations to reach their goals by making it easier, simpler, and faster to author and maintain and share content, period. That's it. That's the business pitch. Frankly, to your site business owner, that's the pitch. I pulled the appendix up here because I wanted to say that, listen, there's a lot of blog posts. This is going to be a blog post. I've been talking about schema.org for a few years. And I want to emphasize some of the distributions that I've been heavily looking at and pulling ideas from. Of course, you can use a distribution to start. The definition of what a distribution is rapidly changing in the community. We're starting to build like little recipes. And frankly, the schema.org blueprints module kind of fits into that. It generates part of those recipes. And I pulled out, look, these are the features, for the next phase of this demo that I might gradually add and sort out. The more I add, the more I can debug. If there's an issue, I want to figure it out. Also, who knows, this might roll into a very basic distribution and frankly a development tool for me, so that I'm really testing this module in a fully working environment. So, you can find me if you have questions. You can find me at Jay Rockwood. You can post comments below. I hope you enjoyed watching. I've been enjoying sharing this with the community, and I look forward to seeing you in person at events. I am presenting at some of the upcoming events. And take care for now.